Last week, Florida became the latest state to ban schools from teaching critical race theory. Critical race theory isn't a single lesson or curriculum as such, but a way of teaching different ideas about privilege, systemic bias, and racism. But the term has moved from the academic circles into lawmakers' offices over whether it should be taught in secondary schools. Joining us to answer that and more are Nathan Hoffman, an advisor with the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, and Illinois State Representative LaShawn Ford, whose West Side district includes much of the Austin community. Gentlemen, welcome and welcome back to Chicago Tonight. Nathan Hoffman, let's start with you, please. How would you define critical race theory?
Well, I don't know that it's as much about how I would define critical race theory, but I would say, as I understand it, the critical race theory goes back, sort of the idea of it goes back, several decades, and it's built on the idea that America, at its core, is a racist place, and that there are sort of permanent oppressors and permanent groups of people who are oppressed. And in that case, we're talking about white individuals being the oppressors and black individuals being the oppressed.
Representative Ford, how do you view critical race theory?
Brandis, I view it simply as an examination of how our laws intersect with issues in society as it relates to race. And when you think about it, you think about how you have at least 13% of society being the blacks that believe that we need to examine how more black people are incarcerated, how the war on drugs impacted black people more, why black people are more disproportionately impacted by the laws that we have. We have to examine that critically.
Nathan, what is your concern with teaching CRT, as it's often called in short, with teaching that theory in schools?
Well, I think with my understanding of the theory, I think the concern is that it is sort of an ideology that has largely been, until recently, kept within sort of the elite institutions and sort of the elite political circles for a matter of intellectual debate. And I think the challenge comes in when you bring that into classrooms, particularly elementary age classrooms, where students don't yet have the ability to think critically, and they're at that point learning how to learn. And so when you introduce some of these very contentious pieces of information and theories, it's challenging and sort of takes away from what I believe should be the central focus of education, which is a strong base of literacy, math instruction, and things like that.
Representative Ford, do you think it's important that students are taught some age-appropriate level of critical race theory?
Every child should be thinking critically no matter what they're doing and what they've been taught. We can no longer allow students to just go in and learn the spelling words and just remember things. They have to critically understand why things are happening the way they're happening. They have to know, and that's what critical race theory is about. If you take away race, we know that our focus in higher education and any education is to make sure that students think critically.
Nathan, why do you believe this theory has become a bit of a political football over the last year, but especially in recent months?
Well, I think that you have a number of high-profile political figures, from the previous president of the United States to officials in Congress today, who have elevated the issue. And I think the big challenge with an idea like critical race theory or these other sort of contentious issues is it brings out the worst of both sides, and I think it brings out performative politics. It doesn't really allow for these types of nuanced conversations, because I do think there is a middle ground and a way that we should be looking at this. In terms of I agree with a lot of what Representative Ford said. Students should be thinking critically. They should understand history, all of the history, the good and the bad. I think the challenge is it's become a politicized issue that's more interested in performance than substance.
Representative Ford, why do you think this has gotten to be political all of a sudden?
Because people fear change, and they fear that when you bring about change, it's going to impact their way of life. But that's not the case. And I have to tell you, Brenda, if you have children, and everyone that have children, they know that children always say why. Children are born to critically think. They want to know why things are happening. And we have to make sure that we teach them critical thinking. And so I think that when you have a certain segment of our population where everything seemed to be going well for them. They don't want to change it. But we know that just today, we realized that the city of Chicago, you said, will recognize Juneteenth. There are a lot of people that didn't understand that, and they don't understand why it's important to recognize it. That's critical thinking.
Nathan, if not through critical race theory, which is something that may or may not be already being taught in schools, how should schools teach and discuss racism and that history?
Well, I think actually Representative Ford just hit on a really good point, which is that the Juneteenth holiday, and certainly I can say that I'm not super far removed from high school, and I don't recall learning about Juneteenth in school. So I do think there is a conversation to be had about what does the history curriculum look like that we're teaching in schools, and I think that's an honest conversation that we can all have. There's a lot of things that we can do there from different curriculum forms and different things like that. I think the challenge becomes when you get to the more radical parts of critical race theory, which look at students based solely on sort of these surface level diversity features like race, and try to lump them into certain circumstances as either privileged oppressors or the opposite. And I think we should stay focused on individuals and sort of the character and things that they bring as individuals, not as some service level diversity feature they have.
What do you say to some teachers, because they've been sort of caught in the middle of this, Nathan, who feel a bit controlled by these laws? Maybe they're limited if they had some plans for teaching, and they're concerned now about whether or not a plan for teaching a piece of Black history and American history might be somehow touched by a state's new law that bans critical race theory.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm generally opposed to any mandate that's going to make it more difficult for teachers to to do their craft in the classroom. I think we need to ensure that there are certain guiding principles in place that look at what specifically we need to have students learn in the classroom. But besides that, I think we ought to leave it to teachers to figure out how that is ultimately taught.
And Representative Ford, in about 30 seconds, what do some of these bans in other states? What do you think that says about how Americans view race and history?
They want to see history as it is. And as we said on your show before, history should not be something that makes us feel good. It should tell the truth. And we know now that the 1619 Project is out, and people fear teaching the 1619 Project simply because we don't teach students how to critically think. And so we need to make sure that the history that we're teaching, we have to recognize that it is flawed and it is bad if it's not accurate and if it doesn't tell the whole story. So it's doing more damage than even thinking about teaching critical race theory in our educational system.
Okay. My thanks to you both. That's where we'll have to leave it. Nathan Hoffman and Representative LaShawn Ford for joining us.
Thank you, Brandis.